At first, everyone believed Nelson Rockefeller had a fatal heart attack in his office, but the truth was much worse. When the real story came out, it shocked the nation. Like any wealthy family that catches the public's eye, the Rockefellers had a rather vast closet full of family scandals. Stories of extramarital affairs, illegitimate children, bigamy, and even cannibalism rocked the Rockefeller world. As a result of these secrets, this family had an obsession with keeping the press and the public on their side. But there was one secret, dating back to the family's origins, that had potential to bring this family down to its knees. While the name Rockefeller seems very American, the roots of this family are actually in Germany. Around 1723, Johann Peter Rockefeller immigrated to America. He had no idea that this fateful move laid the foundation for one of America's richest families to blossom. In 1810, William Avery Rockefeller was born in New York. He had the nickname Devil Bill, and for good reason. Bill was famous for selling elixirs and providing loans to farmers with a hefty interest rate of 12%. His favorite clients were the ones he knew could never pay him back because he could heartlessly take their land and foreclosure. This wasn't Bill's only dirty trick. Bill Rockefeller would do almost anything to make a sale. On a business trip in upstate New York, he was pretending to be deaf when one of his female customers, Eliza Davidson, said to a friend, "If that man were not deaf and dumb, I'd marry him." At that point, it was time to drop the charade and fess up. He did, and the two walked down the aisle. While it sounds like a Hollywood meet cute, it was anything but. As it turned out, Eliza was not Bill's first choice for a wife. He was in love with another woman named Nancy Brown, who was too poor to be considered a viable life partner. But Eliza had one thing over Nancy. Her father offered a $500 wedding present. Bill chose money over love and married Eliza. Bill and Eliza set up house in Auburn, New York, and had 3 sons and 3 daughters, but they also lived with scandal. Once the family had moved up in the world, they hired a maid. In 1849, officials charged Bill with a serious offense. It said that he'd had his way with this employee. Worse still, he used a firearm to do it. Bill was not the kind of person to wait around for a lengthy prison sentence. Bill borrowed money from his father-in-law to pay his bail and then packed up the family and skipped off to Owego, New York. His father-in-law didn't like that and decided to sue Bill for the money. Bill knew it was time for another move, but realized his family was becoming more of a liability than an asset. Bill packed up and moved to Ohio and heartlessly left his family defend for themselves. Bill's wife Eliza was still in New York State, so Bill saw no problem with taking another wife in Ohio. This was Margaret Allen, who had 20 years to his 45. He shrouded his past by living in a new name, Dr. Bill Livingston. Even before Bill took up Margaret, he'd been betraying Eliza all along. He'd kept his previous love, Nancy Brown, as both his housekeeper and mistress, and the two even welcomed 2 illegitimate daughters. Bill never did right by the women in his life. But thankfully, Bill's son was more of an upstanding citizen. When Bill's son, John D. Rockefeller, turned 16, he got his first job with Hewitt and Tuttle. Unlike his father, John was a conscientious employee who even tried to abide by the law. Soon John was ready to start up a business with a partner. He needed $1,000 more than the $800 he'd saved. Dad stepped up and loaned him the money, at 10% interest, of course. Now all Bill had to do was wait and see if his investment would pay off. In 1859, America was split in 2 by a war. While this may have been a tragedy for the country, it was money in the bank for John. He made a fortune providing food and supplies for the Union Army, but making money this way would only last while the war continued. John needed to find the next big moneymaker, and thankfully he did. And boy, was it a doozy. John had learned to be a shrewd businessman from his father, and when Edwin Drake struck oil in Pennsylvania, John knew that's where his future lay. John found partners, and together they established a refinery in the Flats near Cleveland. In 1865, the 25-year-old Rockefeller bought out his partners. He wanted to do it alone, but not completely alone. The year before he bought out his partners, John ended his 9-year courtship with Laura Celeste Spellman. Happily, he ended it by marrying her in a small private ceremony. Within a year, they would have a baby girl and a house on Cleveland's Millionaires' Row. Not too shabby for the son of an elixir salesman, but he was just getting started. In 1870, John started the Standard Oil Company, which was soon worth an astounding $1 million. This was the largest company in the U.S. at the time, which had control of 10% of the oil business in America. 3 years after he started this company, a depression hit the country. While it was a disaster for most business people, John found a silver lining. While many businesses were hurting from the Great Depression, John started buying up failing oil companies. By 1877, he now had under his control 90% of all the oil in the country. This earned John a spot on an impressive list. He was in the top 20 of America's richest men. Surely this would make him a very happy man. Spoiler alert, it didn't. John had spent a lifetime working long hours and making millions. Sadly, this led to depression. He later said, "All the fortune that I have made has not served to compensate me for the anxiety of that period." In other words, making money did not make him happy. Another thing that didn't make him happy: his family's secrets coming out for all to see. Because the public was starting to notice John, some journalists did some digging. They uncovered the fact that John's father was of a questionable nature, and they wanted to know all the details of his sordid story. Although a reward of $8,000 was up for grabs, no one ever found John's father. With no evidence of his father's scandalous past, John continued to be successful. He and his family moved themselves to a West 54th Street mansion in New York City. He also moved his company headquarters to New York's Broadway. The Rockefellers were ready to make a splash in the Big Apple. But it wasn't the most ideal family life. John had 5 children, and the youngest and only boy was John D. Rockefeller, Jr. In 1887, when the boy was just 13, he collapsed as a result of working too hard. The family's solution was heartless. They sent him to their country house where he did strenuous physical labor. Don't feel too sorry for him, though. His family was swimming in money. In 1893, there was another stock market crash, and this one worse than in 1870. John, however, took these hard times in stride. He seized the opportunity to purchase a 400-acre estate on New York's Hudson River and planned to make it even larger. But something was coming that could end the fortune of this oil-rich family. In 1895, John D. Rockefeller made a secret move and quietly retired from his company. But the very next year, history itself experienced a definite shift. You see, as electricity began to replace the kerosene-powered light, you'd think that Rockefeller would have a reason for concern. Luckily, fate had a saving grace in store for him. Henry Ford put together the prototype for the first modern car in 1896. With car use on the rise, Americans would be needing oil for a long, long time. John's fortune was certainly secure, but his character was about to come under attack. John's Standard Oil Company had come under a lot of criticism for holding a virtual monopoly on the oil industry. Writer Ida Tarbell's father had lost his business due to John's heartless dealings, so in 1902, she decided to write an exposé about Standard Oil. Writer in the center of this article was John D. Rockefeller himself. An article like this could turn the public against him. Little did John know, this was only the tip of the iceberg. In 1906, then-President Theodore Roosevelt took on John and Standard Oil. Suddenly, the public had had their fill of all things Rockefeller. They even called them one of the male factors of great wealth. Just as Rockefeller's reputation was at an all-time low, a secret came out. Remember, John's father, Bill, had married at least twice without getting a divorce in between. This piece of spicy news was all the public needed to hear. Now they had two reasons to hate the Rockefellers, both their unfair monopolies and their loose morals. However, John's reputation wasn't completely destroyed. You see, John D. Rockefeller had poured money into charity and continued to do so. The family opened the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1901 and created the General Education Board in 1903 to make sure all children in the South received an education, no matter their race. Helping others must have felt good to John because he decided to do it full-time. By 1910, John had had enough and decided to commit fully to charity work. However, there was still trouble in store for the Rockefeller family. A year later, the Supreme Court demanded that the Rockefellers would have to completely dismantle Standard Oil. In 1913, John's daughter Edith traveled to Switzerland, but this was not to climb the Alps in Yodel. She suffered from depression and she wanted treatment by a leading psychologist. At the time, this was Carl Gustav Jung. Edith got her cure and also found her vocation in life. One of Edith's quirks was that she chose to celebrate Christmas on December 15th because of her interest in astrology. She also thought she had a past life, but this was no ordinary past life. Edith truly believed in reincarnation and that she herself had once been King Tut's first wife. And that wasn't all. On one unforgettable occasion, she reportedly shared only the other day, while glancing through an illustrated paper, "I saw a picture of a chair removed from the king's chamber. Like a flash, I recognized that chair. I'd sat in it many times." Back on planet Earth, Edith's brother, John D. Rockefeller Jr., was facing a huge scandal. John Jr. was now at the helm of the Rockefeller business. In September of 1913, miners working at his Colorado Fuel and Iron Company called a strike and walked off the job. The company heartlessly evicted the workers and their families from the company-owned towns. The workers built tents to live in and prepared to wait out John Jr. There was going to be a standoff, and it would end in bloodshed. The National Guard came in to control the violence, but it soon became clear that they were only supporting John D. Rockefeller Jr. Not only did they draw arms against the strikers on April 20th, 1904, but the horrifying climax of the entire ordeal ended with the National Guard dousing the tents with kerosene and lighting them on fire. By the time the smoke had cleared, the tally of lost lives was a shocking 25 people, 11 of them children. Then the situation took another nightmarish turn. In response to the massacre, the miners rose up against strikebreakers and officials and fought back, resulting in around 50 fatalities. That's when President Woodrow Wilson took action, sending in federal troops to take control of the chaos. Thankfully, they acted in the spirit of neutrality, and the strike eventually ended on December 10th. John Jr. now had blood on his hands. When it came to the massacre, John Jr. washed his hands of taking any responsibility for the tragedy. Even still, most people understood that this strike wouldn't have happened if John D. Rockefeller Jr. had provided safe working conditions and fair pay. The Rockefeller family was once again taking a nosedive in their popularity. John Jr. needed help, and he knew where to find it. Having someone handle a company's PR was a new idea at the time, and John Jr. turned to PR guru Ivy Lee, as well as future Canadian Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King, to solve this dilemma. Their idea was to humanize the Rockefellers, and John Jr. was soon talking directly to miners and their families. The idea worked, and the Rockefeller family enjoyed a new popularity. Now it was time for the Rockefeller name to go down in history. In 1931, the Great Depression cast a shadow of unemployment over thousands of workers. John Jr. did something to help with that. He began construction of the Rockefeller Center, which would bring jobs to 75,000 workers and would inspire one of the most recognizable photographs in American history. Lunch atop a skyscraper is a photo known all around the world. A photographer caught a picture of 11 Rockefeller Center workers enjoying a casual lunch on a beam that was a dizzying 250 meters above the ground. Sadly, during this construction boom in New York City, 2 out of 5 workers had falls that were either fatal or resulted in disability. Even decorating the inside of the Rockefeller Center caused controversy. Once the Rockefeller Center was nearing completion, John Jr. looked to his son Nelson for ideas about artwork to adorn the walls. Nelson's mother, Abby, was a huge fan of Mexican artist Diego Rivera. Nelson trusted his mother's judgment and went ahead and commissioned a huge mural. However, there was just one problem. Diego was a socialist. This would not end well. When the New York World Telegram saw Diego's yet unfinished mural, they called it anti-capitalist. Nelson knew he was in trouble, but then Diego made it even worse. Diego himself, or one of his assistants, added a small portrait of the despised Russian leader Vladimir Lenin to the mural. Now it was Nelson's turn to face the wrath of the public. Nelson Rockefeller decided to avoid bad publicity to remove Diego's unfinished mural. Artists protested the destruction of Diego's painting, but in the end, it had to go. First, they covered it up, and then in 1934, workers destroyed it and carried the pieces away in wheelbarrows. It was a sad day for artists everywhere, but for Nelson, even sadder ones were coming next. Nelson Rockefeller had his share of scandals. You see, when he was married to Todd Hunter Clark's husband, he carried on with other women. When Mary complained, Nelson just suggested that they live separate lives and stay together to avoid a scandal. Mary put up with it for as long as she could, but in 1962, they got to divorce. Instead of fighting over who got the kids, they had a debate about the house. Nelson and Mary spent their wedded life at a prestigious Fifth Avenue address. Neither was willing to budge on the house, so Mary took the top 2 floors and Nelson got the bottom. When Nelson remarried Margarita Large Happy Fittler, Mary certainly didn't want to bump into the new wife at the entrance. Luckily, there were 2 separate entrances. As it turned out, Mary had a very good reason for avoiding Happy. Back in 1960, Happy had a baby girl named Melinda. This was 3 years before her divorce and 2 years before Nelson's. Many speculate that Melinda was actually a product of Nelson's affair with Happy. And the real kicker, Nelson and Happy's first husband were close friends. Nelson had gained a daughter, but sadly, he was about to lose a son. In 1961, Nelson faced a tragedy. His son, Michael, had been on an expedition in New Guinea when he found himself in a sticky situation. His boat wound up capsized. Instead of waiting for help, he tried to swim quite a distance to shore. Reportedly, around 14 miles, he never made it, and no one has been able to find his body. Most assume he drowned, but there are other, much more horrific theories. A tragic drowning or animal attack seemed like the likely culprits for Michael Rockefeller's disappearance. But in 1962, the Associated Press printed a story that said that local people had taken Michael's life and used his bones as fishing equipment and weapons. A Dutch patrolman went a step further. He speculated that headhunters had eaten Michael's brains. Of course, no substantial proof can support these horrifying claims. Michael's uncle, Winthrop, besides becoming governor of Arkansas, had his moments of scandal. When he was in the military, he reportedly had an affair with Candy Mosler. Mosler later became infamous in 1964 for having a relationship with her own nephew and then allegedly bumping off her own husband. Following his supposed tryst with Candy, Winthrop had 2 marriages that both ended in divorce. But Nelson and Winthrop's father was having romantic entanglements of his own. In 1951, 3 years after losing his first wife, John Jr. married for the second time. He broke the bro code by marrying his best friend's widow. This was socialite and art lover Martha Baird Allen. John Jr. was ready to enjoy the last years of his life. The only thing on his mind was who he would leave his vast fortune to. What he did with it was a shocker. In 1952, John Jr. sold the rather large family home to his sons, but he still had about $130 million to think about. He gave $57 million to the charitable Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the rest of it to other charities. The thing was, all his heirs were already taken care of. It was then time for the Rockefellers to turn to politics. Nelson Rockefeller seemed bent on becoming president of the U.S. He tried to get the Republican presidential nomination 3 times in the 1960s. Eventually, in 1974, Gerald Ford called him up and he became the 41st Vice President of the United States. With this accomplishment, Nelson could now live out his remaining years with pride. Well, that didn't happen. For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factornate member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details. 2 years after walking away from the White House, Nelson suffered a heart attack and passed. The report came in that the heart attack happened while Nelson was hard at work in his office, at the Rockefeller Center, no less. When it came out later that he wasn't at his office, the press released a jaw-dropping updated report. What they found out shocked the nation. It didn't make any difference that Nelson wasn't at the office. What was scandalous was who he was with. When he had his heart attack, he was in his townhouse with Megan Marshak, a 25-year-old member of his staff. There was yet another Rockefeller, a boat to make headlines. If you enjoyed this Factornate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.